She was supposed to do this didactic, and the content was put together by Kanetta, and I'll be presenting today. I've done this with Kanetta before, so I feel pretty comfortable with it. But if you have any pressing questions, we'll save those for Kanetta probably. She's going to be back with us hopefully next week, and the week after she has part 2 of this. So I'm just going to get us started on supporting LGBTQIA plus youth, because there's a lot of variables out there. Here we go. So we're going to spend our time today talking a little bit about terminology, so we know how to talk about it. Historically, doctors would decide which gender to make a child based on their physical anatomy, and it was thought that this would be in the interest of a child's well-being. Adults with the condition, a condition of being intersexed, advocate for waiting until the child can choose now. Most people are sex assigned at birth, and it matches their gender identity. Cisgender, by the way, means that it's a lineup of biological sex and gender identity, and that they are both in line or aligned with each other. Transgender trans meaning it crosses the line, it crosses over trans. So our biological sex is assigned at birth. It has to do with our physical body, and in addition, our internal reproductive characteristics and chromosomes. Intersex is ambiguous genitalia or differing chromosomal combinations. Gender expression is how we express our gendered identity. Do we express ourselves out in society as male or female or neither or combos? And gender expression comes out through our clothing, hairstyle, our mannerisms, activities, sometimes our roles, and even our careers. Gender expression often leads people to assume your gender orientation or your gender identity. Western culture says, defines what is acceptable gender expression, and norms for girls tend to be a little broader than norms for boys and men. For instance, girls are called tomboys around adolescence and are just expected then to grow up to become more feminine or grow out of it, but they're not always or heavily shamed for having stereotypical male interests when they're younger. Boys do not have an acceptable gender variant. They are called sissies, are pansies, and are punished for deviating from what is thought to be typical gender expression. And this, of course, is all based on patriarchy, believing that no man would want to be a woman or to not be a real man. Pink is thought to be a female color, and men generally will avoid that color. Men's emotional expression can be anger or stoicism, but they are not really encouraged to be verbally or physically soft, weak, vulnerable, affectionate even. This is culturally imposed upon them. In some European cultures, that is not as strict. For example, Italian and Spanish men have been known to kiss without horrible repercussions. And this also can vary, gender expression can vary during different time periods and across different cultures. More terminology, back to the gender identity. So when you are cisgendered, again, that means you line up biological sex and gender identity, and transgender means you cross over. And so cross-dressers, generally cisgendered men who enjoy expressing the feminine aspects of themselves and is different distinctly than being a gay man or a transgender woman. Cross-dressing for specific purposes, being a drag king or queen, is more associated with sexual orientation and tends to be more art than identity. Gender queer doesn't fit into either box. Queer used to be a negative term that was taken back by younger people in urban communities, and their identity tends to be more fluid. They do not let themselves get boxed in. Bigender means that you identify as both male and female, and pan, I'm sorry, I skipped agender. Agender is neither male nor female. So bigender, some of both. Agender, you disavow both. And pangender means you identify with all genders. Just as Kara said earlier on, citing Q, it's important to ask about pronoun use. And it might change or evolve over time. Somebody, and actually we've had cases on Echo where there was a little frustration with the family about a youth who wanted to be identified as she or her, and then switch to they, and then back, and it's not that unusual for it to evolve, especially as they're trying to come to terms with internally what do they feel that they are in terms of gender. Another reason that you should use use and identify the pronouns that you're comfortable with is so that people won't make wrong assumptions about you. So that's one idea about using those pronouns. But the other idea is that when you use pronouns, what you're saying, what you're sort of advertising, as it were, is that I'm open to hearing what other people use as their pronouns. And so even if you are completely cisgendered and feel like, what's the point? I'm a woman with long hair, I'm a man with a mustache, everybody can tell. The point is being socially supportive of people who might not be as clear-cut as you, and that you are indicating your willingness and openness to understand those pronouns. Sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. So you can, there are all these different gender icons that are on the screen for you. And a lot of times people thought that this equated with gender identity, but it's not that clean cut. So if you're bisexual, you could be attracted to either or both men and women. If you are pansexual, there's a range of types of gender expressions, and you're not attracted to a specific sex or body part. However, you tend to be more generally accepting of people's sexuality. Gender expression is when we do things and act in ways that fall into a male or female gender expression. But the further we dig into this topic, the more it splits off, and there's a lot of variability in there. We don't, in general, out in the community, we avoid using, although we say heterosexual for women who are attracted to men and men who are attracted to women, we don't use homosexual because it was associated with mental illness and wasn't removed from the DSM until 1973. And so that's a word that has sort of been discarded by homosexuals themselves and by people in these studies of sexual orientation and gender. So what about that Q? The Q is for people who are questioning or queer. So it has a double duty here. Like homosexual, queer was used as a slur. However, the urban community has reclaimed it. And that's been for some time now. And it can encompass everyone or describe one's expression, orientation, or identity. So a couple of resources for you as we move forward. If you're working with youth, then these cartoonish kinds of, they're just resources, they're educational tools for you, can be helpful when you're working with a youth to have them understand where do they fall on these things. And this is pretty simple here. You talk about gender. This is the gender-bred person. And by the way, if you Google gender-bred person, you will come up with a newer version than V2.0. I think they're on 4 now. And it's pretty much the same thing, but gender is one of those things that people think they understand, but it's a little bit complicated. Gender isn't just binary. It's not either or. It's both and. You can vary on all of these scales over here to the right. So if you choose that you are not gendered, you'd prefer non-gendered, then you would stay way over here on the left of these little blue circles. But the more you identify with a female or a woman gendered position, then you would put a mark out here. There's little samples of how you use this right on the sheet, and you can download this in a worksheet, I'm pretty sure, from that website. So there's a lot of possibilities here. You can feel a lot of womanness and a little manness, or vice versa, and there's all sorts of ways to sort of identify that. Gender expression is how you choose to show on the outside, how you show yourself to the world, how do you express it. And so there's all sorts of terms that go with that: butch, femme, androgynous, neutral, hyper masculine. So those are ways to express gender. And then your biological sex. Where are you in terms of your biological sex? From male, female, intersex, and self-identification. Okay. And then finally down here is who are you attracted to? And there are, believe it or not, there are people who aren't really sexually attracted, period. And they tend to be more what we would consider asexual. And then, of course, there are people who are straight and fully attracted to the opposite sex. Gay, attracted to your own sex, gay or lesbian. Pansexual, you're attracted across the board. Asexual, you're not attracted at all, etc. And these, when you start, you might feel like, oh, wow, that's a lot for a kid. But when you start talking with them about this gingerbread person and where we might think about ourselves, that's our identity in one place. We might feel attracted to people, and they have that marked as the heart of the gingerbread person. How we look and dress is our expression. And then finally, what are our biological sex characteristics? And so there's a lot of things, and it can be pretty complicated. And this is one of those resources that can start to sort it out and help people to understand all the different levels of it. And, you know, while I talk about using this with youth, I think it's super helpful with their parents for them to understand all the different levels of sexuality and identity. This is the gender unicorn. It is very similar to what I just showed you about the gender-bred person. However, for whatever reason, adolescents identify more with this one. And but it's used in very much the same way. Your gender identity, what you think about yourself, your gender expression, what you look like, and how you present yourself. Assign sex at birth, who you're physically attracted to, and who you're, they do split out one more thing. Who you're physically attracted to may be different than who you are emotionally attracted to. And so the deeper we get into this topic, the more variability we find in there. I'm going to look at a few notes that I have here from Kaneda and make sure I'm covering everything. Next to gender identity, she has one's internal sense of being male, female, neither, both, or other. Everybody has a gender identity, including everybody on this echo. For transgender people, their sex is assigned at birth, and their own internal sense of gender identity isn't the same as that. Female, woman, and girl, and male, man, and boy are not necessarily linked to each other, but are just 6 common gender identities. Gender expression is the physical manifestation through clothing, hairstyle, voice. Most transgender people seek to make their gender expression, how they look on the outside, match who they feel like they are on the inside, rather than matching their sex assigned at birth. Sex assigned at birth is a combination of anatomy, hormones, and chromosomes. We don't simply use sex because of the vagueness of the definition of sex and its place in transphobia. Chromosomes are frequently used to determine sex from prenatal karyotyping, although not as often as genitalia. And chromosomes do not determine genitalia or gender. Who you're physically attracted to is your sexual orientation. It can be romantic, but emotional attraction could be from a variety of factors not limited to gender identity. You could be, it's important to note that sexual and romantic emotional attraction can be from a variety of factors and not necessarily limited to sex assigned at birth. Let's see. Talks a little bit about where you can get this resource, and and you'll have that in the references to this. And several other issues with terminology and presentation. The use of the inaccurate term biological sex. Do you see that on the slide? I'm looking for it. I don't really see that.
Sex assigned at birth, is that what she's referencing?
Maybe, although she has it in quotes, biological sex, which fails to recognize that everyone has sex characteristics prescribed to them, and some other terminology issues. So at any rate, these two slides, the genderbread person and the gender unicorn, have been very helpful for a lot of people in helping children and youth understand their own sexuality and gender identification. And so we do want to be open to understanding how they see themselves. And as a parent of a transgender daughter, this really made a huge difference in our lives last year when my sexually assigned son from birth went to a gender clinic in Summit County. And it was really the use of these tools and their frank conversation with her about how she was feeling on the inside that by the time she left that initial appointment, she was she. And that was a little bit of a shock to us, but it wasn't a complete surprise. We knew there was some fuzziness around the edges and not being confident that she felt like a boy. And so it wasn't that it was a complete shock, but their ability to work with her and help her self-identify in all these different categories really made a huge difference. And she walked out of that appointment confident that she had like gotten in touch with her inner self. So how do we create affirming environments for people? First of all, make sure that you're using name and gender and pronoun preferences verbally and on all forms. Educate the front desk and other staff so that they aren't making assumptions about people's gender. Have books, signage, and symbols around. It really does help. It makes it feel like a welcoming and accepting place. And you have to practice because you're going to make a mistake. This slide says, if you make a mistake, and I'm here to tell you, I make a mistake every single day. And we've known since last January that she is transgender. And so I'll say the wrong name. I'll use the wrong gender. I'll say, hey, you boys. It's never ending because, you know, I had 8 years of calling her him. And so you will make mistakes, and it's not important that you never make a mistake. It's important that you make the effort to get it right. And I think that's where we'll wrap up today. I will show you briefly. I'm not going to read any of this. You have resources and references. And so that's the end of this presentation. And I'd be happy to field any questions, or I might divert them to when Kenneth is back with us, but that is the end of our presentation today.